when we kind of begin, I think you stand either side of the ground quite.
Great to see so many here. Really excited at introducing Dr. John Kelly, Professor Terence Brannigan, and Dr. Malone here today. Professor Terence Brannigan is currently Chair of Northern Ireland Tourism and the Maze Long Kesh Development Board. And today, what we're going to do is we're going to build on a lot of the excellent enterprise activities that we have been working on over the last number of years, such as the PBL, the enterprise fortnight, the many PBL activities that we have been doing across curriculum areas. I know it's easy to forget sometimes, but we do accommodate 4,500 students over 2 weeks at the start of the year. And it's also important to realise why that is important for our students, is because, as you've probably read in the press, mental health issues are becoming more and more prevalent, and things like that, as well as building enterprise and entrepreneurship skills, they also are very, very important for building resilience. So building on that good work, it's with great pleasure that I announce our partnership with this gentleman. He has a wide range of experience with entrepreneurship and successful business companies. So without further ado, I'm going to hand you over now to Dr. Michael Malone.
Hi everyone. I'm not going to go through the normal introductions. I think everyone here knows me today. But what I am going to go through is I have about 60 slides. No, I've actually only 6 or 7. But I'm going to go through them fairly quickly. A lot of it will be familiar to you. Today isn't about me or the information that I'm going to try and impart to you. It's really showing you the direction of travel that we as a college are embarked on. And we also have today another guest who's flown in from England, Helen Beardsmore. Helen will kind of identify herself. She is from the EDGE Foundation in London, which is a charitable organisation that helps lobby government with regard to education and the direction of travel of education. And obviously what we do with project-based learning is really important, and that's part of the discussion that we're having with Helen as well. And we've invited Helen along today to show that, if you like, the final destination of project-based learning in terms of generating more entrepreneurs. So what I'm going to start off with is what has been our strategy over the last while. And what you can see from that is obviously creating an entrepreneurial environment has been really important for us. And that is, how do we assess students and how do we get them to learn? And that's something that we've been focusing on and looking at how we can actually improve it. I would never claim that we've got it perfect. I think we're, again, on a journey. Some people are further along the road than others, but we know the direction of travel, and that's really important. And ultimately, you know, the question that Terence asked me whenever we first met was, what is it you're trying to do? What's the final objective? And the objective for us is, how do we grow more entrepreneurs? How do we get more students to become the employers rather than just employees? And not everybody has that disposition, but there are some amongst our students, and we need to see how we can actually support them going forward. The second part of our strategy was get the edge, and it obviously ties in with the EDGE Foundation as well. But we want our students to have an advantage over others in terms of not just getting a qualification. For me, a qualification is a byproduct. The learning is the important bit, and how we assess the students is the important bit of what we actually do. The qualification's a byproduct, but it's important and we have to do them. Project-based learning, we've looked at a couple of different models and we've produced our own definition of that. There's lots of definitions, and we've had discussions about that today with Helen, who's seen many different examples around the world. But we've created our own definition, and that's what we're working towards to help support the development of entrepreneurs. This will not happen unless staff have been trained and understand how we're trying to deliver this. A lot of staff have been doing it naturally and doing it absolutely superbly. But it's about transferring that good practice to other areas, and that's part of what we've been doing with the CPD. The Enterprise Fortnight is absolutely critical in this, and that is, how do we introduce all of our 4,500 full-time students to project-based learning, to develop their enterprise skills, and then hopefully encouraging some of those students to becoming entrepreneurs. And then the final step I have here is the Entrepreneurs Club. Now, that's what we've called it at the minute. We've invited you, the staff, along to meet with Professor Terence. I'm going to give him his official title because he is a professor at the University of Ulster, and he has a massive range of experience in this. And you need to be an entrepreneur to really convince and support other entrepreneurs, which is part of the reason when we met and discussed it, we thought it was really important, and he jumped at the opportunity to work with us in the college. The direction of the Entrepreneurs Club, I don't know where that'll eventually end up. This is true project-based learning, and that is, we're on a project here. We don't know what the solution's going to be, but we're going to try and develop the best possible solution with the constraints that we have inside the college. And that's really where we are in terms of our strategy, going from creating this environment through to actually generating real entrepreneurs who want to set up their own companies, generate income, employ people, and so on. And as I say, I'm not an expert because I'm not an entrepreneur, but we have an expert along today who can help us with that. So the strategy, as I say, this is our own particular philosophy around this, is we think that by giving people enterprising skills and creating these activities, we will start to generate more entrepreneurs and help support those people. And the background of that is obviously our a pyramid, if you like, enterprise skills for all of our students. So whether you're at level 2, level 1, level 5, we want you to develop the skills that are appropriate to your level and your particular discipline. So you'll see, for example, the Enterprise Fortnight, we encourage students to go in for competitions. We bring guest speakers in from industry. We've introduced project-based learning. We get student volunteering, going out and working with charities and social enterprises. And then our student fairs, where the students are selling their product and trying to generate income. So that's, if you like, the foundation stone of our pyramid for all of our students. Then there'll be a number of students who will move up a step from that. They'll maybe have an entrepreneurial flair and start to develop ideas and innovation. And we have a number of things that we use to help drive that, such as the CAST, Conference for the Advancement of Science and Technology, and a lot of our staff here have had their students present at that. CDIO, Conceive, Design, Implement and Operate, was one of the early things that we used to help drive the pedagogy around this type of delivery. Innovation funding, where we're working with companies externally. Our international partnerships, because we have learnt so much from other countries in terms of what they do and what has worked well for them. And then this is something that we kind of coined a number of years ago, small R, big D. Small in research, big on development. And what we want to try and do is our students aren't getting into blue sky research, but they get into the development of applications and various other systems and services. And then finally, the entrepreneurial aspect of it. And that'll be, again, a reduced cohort. The business mentoring, the entrepreneur, and this again was one of the light bulb moments for me whenever John came in with the entrepreneur research project, and I then became self-aware that I was probably slightly more right-brained, a bit more chaotic. Anybody's been into my office will see that there's papers all over the place and it's a bit of a mess, and I like to jump from project to project, and Ken adds to that mess. He comes into my office and he leaves all his papers there as well. So we're slightly more right-brained, but once you become self-aware that that's what you are, and that's not a bad thing, that's a good thing. Whether you're left-brained or right-brained, you need to know, and then you need to start to develop some of the other aspects of your personality and the way you get on. We developed our strategic project, which was Get the Edge. We try to develop lots and lots of student companies, and today we have the start of supporting entrepreneurs through the Entrepreneurs Club. So that is basically all I'm going to do in terms of a presentation. What we want today is a dialogue. Obviously, once Terence has kind of given you his background, and John will give you an introduction to it. But we don't know, as I said earlier, we don't know what way this is going to progress. It's one of these things that we'll try a number of things. Some will work, some won't work. But we need to try and see what's going to work for different areas and different types of student. But we want to generate more entrepreneurs. We want to become known as a centre for supporting entrepreneurs. And that's not just a centre in Northern Ireland, but a centre right across the world. You know, as Ken says, we have a phrase that he and I bandy about, and that is big hand, small map. Here's a map of the world, and we're going to conquer it. Okay? We want it to, and our reputation is pretty good. We have worked in Thailand, Singapore, Japan, Spain, other parts of Europe, England, Scotland, Wales, all over the place. But we need to try and pull this together and see how do we produce more entrepreneurs inside our college for our students. That's the focus of this today. And we need your input into this to help, if you like, formulate it, because it may work differently in catering and chefing and food production to engineering or construction and performing arts. All right, there'll be lots of different solutions. Okay, so I'm going to stop at that point, and I'll hand over to John and then to Terence. Thank you.
Okay, I'm John Kelly. I'm going to move around a wee bit, is that okay? And it'll take about 5 minutes just to introduce Terence and a wee bit about what's brought us to this point, really. I'm a medical doctor. I've got a real interest in the brain and how the brain learns, and particularly in the area of education. And that led to my first meeting with Terence, quite a number of years ago now. I just completed a research project on the learning preferences of entrepreneurs. And when a colleague of mine in Stroumillis and I did that, we found nobody had ever investigated this. They'd looked at the traits of entrepreneurs, but nobody had looked at how they learnt. And so we didn't know if there was a common learning style or if there wasn't a common learning style. As it was, the research brought out a clear, very clear pattern of the ways in which entrepreneurs learn, which is diametrically opposite to our formal education system. And it was when I was sitting down in my first meeting with Terence, actually, showing him the results, it was like he saw himself described in the results that he had, and he also could see some of his past business experience in the light of the fact not only that entrepreneurs are primarily right dominant and non-conforming, but they need to have more left-brain people around them, the process people who can actually make sure the processes are fulfilled in the company. Otherwise, their intuitiveness and their big picture thinking can leave them without a business. So that was the first of many discussions that we've had over the last number of years. At that stage, I think I'm right in saying Terence was running his own company in Northern Ireland called Resource. He had been an intrapreneur in a global international company in England. He may say a bit about that. But his entrepreneurial experience started when he was a boy with, as far as I can remember, something like 8 jobs. And he was doing that to make money. Now, you'll not be surprised to know that that was never recognized or rewarded in school. You know, the fact he had 8 jobs on the go all at once and was making money was something that never entered into the day-by-day school curriculum. And yet that was the seed that led to him being such a successful entrepreneur. And I always feel privileged to have a chance to speak with Terence, because for me, he is what I would call a 5-star entrepreneur. He's someone who's been there and has done it and has made it work, and he gets it. He understands what entrepreneurship is about. So everything he says today is coming from his own experience. One of the things we've talked about in the conversations has been the concept of NIPLC, Northern Ireland PLC. We're a small province. We are very dependent on making businesses work, and as the public sector's been shrinking, the government says we need more private enterprise. Who creates private enterprise? entrepreneurs. Where are the future entrepreneurs? They're in the education system, and they're in a system that is totally mismatched to what will drive an entrepreneur and help grow an entrepreneur. So we have a major problem here, and nothing could be more important, I believe anyway, for the future of this province and NI PLC than education. The penny would drop in education that we need as a priority to be recognizing, identifying and nurturing entrepreneurship from primary school right through. Now, one of the exciting things about meeting Michael and Ken and discovering the work of SERC has been this, that FE has probably been the most open from an education point of view to actually doing something. When we did the research on entrepreneurship, we found that probably for about 40 years, there's been ongoing discussion worldwide on the role of education and entrepreneurship. And the argument was won about 30 or 40 years ago. It just goes on being repeated. The problem is no one's actually doing something about it. One of the reasons for that is because there tends to be a confusion between enterprise and entrepreneurship. And a lot of programs that get started up in education are what I would call enterprising programs, and people think that's going to develop entrepreneurs, but they don't realize there's a distinction between the two. And while we want all students to be enterprising, entrepreneurship, and Terry and I certainly have had a lot of conversation about this, entrepreneurship is a special flair, it's a special spark that someone has. And if you make someone for instance, this is what I found when I interviewed about 55 entrepreneurs in Northern Ireland, including Lord Ballyedmond. When they talk about enterprising, they say, well, you need to help them with the soft skills. Well, I have found some of the most successful entrepreneurs are very poor at the soft skills. And if you try and train the soft skills into them, you can train their entrepreneurial edge out of them, for instance. So one of the things that we have been agreed about, certainly in our conversations, is we need to distinguish between what's enterprising, and we want all students to be enterprising, and what is entrepreneurial. We want to identify the entrepreneurial people and nurture them. We should be doing it at primary school, we should be doing it post-primary, but here we are trying to do it at FE. Now, one other thing came out of the research for us, and that was this, that if I was to take just two characteristics, one of the things we found was that one word for entrepreneurs and entrepreneurial thinking is they are non-conforming. Now I want you to think about school, and I want you to think how often during school is a student rewarded for being non-conforming? Hardly ever. In fact, conformity is what you get rewarded for. And yet the entrepreneurs are the non-conforming people. Also, in terms of left and right hemisphere, our education system is totally biased to the left hemisphere. And right hemisphere dominant students often feel they're not quite at the match and not making it because they tend to not think in that very conformist left brain dominant way, which is one of the reasons why when we did the research in FE as well, a few years ago, Dell funded it, we found that the majority of students had a take a job mentality and not a make a job mentality. Even the ones that had a bit of flair and were non-conforming had by the system been so conformed to this idea that I want to get a job rather than I could make a job. And one of the things emerged from that was this, that students who are more right dominant and more non-conforming are less likely to stay on at grammar school or post-primary education and more likely to opt for further education. So what we found through the focus groups and the research that we did was that in FE you have a much larger pool of potential entrepreneurial students than probably are going to be found in so-called mainstream education. We also found in working with the lecturers that you are more likely to have more entrepreneurial lecturers than you're going to have for people who've just stayed in the system all the way through because they've been out and maybe done things out there and then come back in again. And so our conviction was that within FE you've got a tremendous opportunity to, out of this pool of more right dominant students and out of this pool of also more entrepreneurial staff, to bring something together here that can actually produce entrepreneurs in the period of time the students are here studying other subjects, but actually being developed entrepreneurial over those 2 or more years. And so this is why today is very exciting for us, because it's been talked about, there's been papers produced on it, there's been worldwide presentations on it, but so little has actually been done to make a change. To do so, you've got to be willing to be entrepreneurial, and that can be hard for colleges or universities to do, to think that way. That's why you're here today. That's why we're here today, and I'm really looking forward to what Terry has got to say. So I hope that fills you in a wee bit on the picture. We're coming off a research base, we're coming off an experiential base with Terry, and we're coming in, as we see it, into your sort of progressive plan here to actually launch a model for how can we develop real entrepreneurs for this province and help NIPLC be much more successful. So Terry, it's great to introduce you.
Thank you, John. Some good news to start with. This is not a speech, okay? These are just some guidance notes. I always write my own guidance notes about, it's to make sure that one, that I don't go rambling off somewhere. I ramble anyway, but I don't go too far. And two, that I try to get points that I think might be relevant to you, rather than just general points that I would make to any audience. I, by nature, prefer to have jackets and ties off, so I'm going to take my jacket off, and I'm going to try to relax and just talk about me, some of my experiences. I'm going to try and give as many examples as possible, because I get things best when I get an example of how things work or why they worked. I want it to be conversational, so I'll try to be conversational in my style, but what I do want is, at whatever point you feel appropriate, is ask questions. I don't mind challenge. I don't mind cynicism. Genuinely I don't, because it helps sometimes to bring things out more clearly. But most importantly, I want to try and make it as relevant to you, the job that you do and what it is you're trying to do as a college. So as I say, I'll try to make the examples relevant. And there are some very diverse but quite interesting examples. They're examples from my life, so not things that I've taken from other people or things that I've read in a book. They're things that I've done, and I'll explain what I've done, why I did it, and why it worked. And hopefully, as I say, it'll be of interest. The single most important thing to remember about entrepreneurs is you can't spot them. There is no such thing as a typical entrepreneur. They come from all sorts of backgrounds. You'll find them in all sorts of places. Indeed, I didn't know I was an entrepreneur until John told me I was. Because you don't think, I'm an entrepreneur, so I'm going to do this or I'm going to do that. Or I never thought of myself as an entrepreneur. I just went through life spotting opportunities and trying to take them. Some I made a mess of, some I made a success of. Most of those I made a success of were genuinely, and this is not false modesty, genuinely because of other people. And meeting John, what it did for me was clarified in my mind who I was, what I was good at and why I was good at it, the things that I was poor at, and there are lots of them, and why instinctively I looked to have certain types of people alongside me when I was working. Because actually having these types of people alongside me made a success of the whole. And I would not have been successful without certain types of people alongside me, and I'll explain that more as we go through. So there are typical traits within entrepreneurs, but there is no such thing as a typical entrepreneur. They come in every shape, size, form, type, age. So if I looked at what I found out about myself, I guess I became an entrepreneur at about the age of 4. I'm not sure, genuinely I'm not sure as to whether it was because of circumstance or because of an innate trait, and maybe it was a combination of both. And why I say circumstance, I'm not what probably some of our young people would expect an entrepreneur to be. A lot of young people think an entrepreneur is somebody who's probably come from at least a middle class background. and as probably their parents have been in business and they've had experiences from that or learned from that. Actually, my parents were working class. My father was a labourer in the shipyard. My mother had worked in a tobacco factory. My grandfather, Hugh Brown Black, was head of all the unions in the Belfast shipyard when it was employing 40,000 people. So he had been a tradesman and kind of worked his way up to head up all the unions. My first job was helping the milkman before I went to school. So early start, milkman would come round in his electric cart. He was too lazy to get out and go and put the milk bottles down and lift the empties, so I did that for him. And how did he pay me? He paid me in broken biscuits. I kid you not, because the local co-op, when they were selling biscuits, those that got broken, they bagged up and then they would sell them. So he would reward me with a bag of broken biscuits. So my first paycheck was a bag of broken biscuits. And John was not exaggerating when he said I had 8 jobs, and 8 jobs all at the same time. I won't bore you with what they all were, but it was things like delivering papers at the beginning of the day, collecting the money on a Friday night for the newspaper seller, and then recognising the coal man did the same thing. So I said to him, why don't I collect your money as well? It's kind of same area. And then on a Saturday night, I would go around, sell newspapers around the pubs and sing. And this was whilst I was still at school, and collect money. And because I went to a grammar school, when they found out I was singing in pubs on a Saturday night, that didn't go down too well. So I would fit into the unconventional. My parents were evicted 4 times from our homes simply because they had 8 children and couldn't afford to pay the rent. We had the electricity turned off, and that was difficult because actually our cooking was done pan electric stove. So my mother and my father came home from work one evening to find my mother cooking on the fire, and I mean literally cooking on the open fire. Now, I don't tell you that for us to have a oh woe was me moment. It is to say to you, again, just emphasizing, entrepreneurs come in every shape, size, every background, every type, and they are not, underline, not restricted to business. You find entrepreneurs in every place in life. So this is an entrepreneurial environment, not only for your students, but you'll find entrepreneurs amongst you, the staff. And that's one of the journeys hopefully we will take together over the coming weeks, months, etc. So let me now tell you why I'm getting involved here and why I've tried to get involved in probably the most difficult environment for any entrepreneur, which is government. So currently I chair 4 private sector companies and 2 government bodies, tourism and the Kesh Development Corporation, and I advise in certain spheres of government as well. The most difficult environment for any entrepreneur is in government. But there are even entrepreneurs, believe it or not, in government departments. There are even some ministers who've been entrepreneurial, didn't know they were, but they are by nature. So you find them all over. And indeed, John and I have been working with 3 prisoners within the prison authority because they have been recognised through John's process to be entrepreneurial by nature. And what we're trying to do is to help them to create businesses when they come out of prison. We're working with them in prison. Some have now just come out, and help them to create businesses and end up as employers. So you can find them in every place in life. Now, one of the things I'm trying to do is what I always say to John, I don't care whether you call this place the north of Ireland or Northern Ireland, not interested, but what I call Northern Ireland PLC. So what I'm trying to do is recognise that this place that we live in, that is part of us, and we're part of it, was the world leader. Now think of this, we have a population of 1.8 million now. We're a very, very small place in the northeast corner of a very small island, off a bigger island, off of Europe. And yet this place produced the largest shipbuilders in the world, the largest rope makers in the world, the largest linen producers in the world, largest tobacco processors in the world, and we had 82 whisky distilleries in Belfast alone. In Belfast alone. This small place led the world in so many different things. Why? Because it was by its nature entrepreneurial. Better than that, you have a little place like this who was the biggest shipbuilder in the world, and they had to create the means of building the ships, and I don't mean create the shipyard. They actually had to create the island first, Queen's Island, before they were able to create the shipbuilding yard. Now, how far thinking and entrepreneurial is that? Because that is real left field thinking. It wasn't we already had the island. They created that and then created the shipyards and then created the world's greatest ships. And as we all know, Titanic was okay when it left here. So how entrepreneurial were they? Now we therefore have it within us. So we have the DNA within us that created all of that. Why can't we do it again? Why can't we do it again? So that's why, for me, this thing of NIPLC, what does NIPLC mean? Well, it means that we need to find and support and nurture and help entrepreneurs wherever they may be. So we want them in government, we want them in business, we want them in the community and voluntary sector, we want them in civic society, but most of all, we need them in education, training and development. We need them in education, training and development. Both the students and the staff, because that's where it will start. That's where it will start, whether it be at primary school, whether it be at secondary school, whether it be further education, that's where we will find them. And that's where we must start. So no good in having it in government, business, community and voluntary sector and civic society unless we have it in education, training and development. So what's an entrepreneur? I always love to go back to the dictionary to find out what am I supposed to be. If somebody calls me an entrepreneur, how's it defined? It's interesting. So dictionary definition of an entrepreneur: a person who undertakes an enterprise, especially a commercial one, often at personal financial risk. That's what it says in the Oxford English Dictionary. My definition of an entrepreneur: it's a person who conceives of a business idea, is unconcerned about business conventions and risk, and is single-minded in their approach to delivery. So, conceives of a business idea, is unconcerned about business conventions and risk, and is single-minded in their approach to delivery. As John said, entrepreneurs are by their nature unconventional. And I actually enjoy being unconventional. And part of the reason is, and people usually, when I say this, take it with a pinch of salt, but it is absolutely true. I am by nature not very good with people if I don't know them. So I'm one of those people who go to a party, and if I don't know all of the people there, if I have to go to a party and I don't know the people there, I am the person who stands in the corner on their own with a glass of wine, that sad person, because I am by nature shy. And I've had to teach myself not to be. I've had to try to teach myself to get out there and have conversations with people I don't know. Because I found it really difficult to get a girlfriend, by the way, when I was about 14, I went to my dad. I went to my dad and said, Dad, I'm not very good with girls. I don't know what to say to them. And he said, son, you sing, don't you? Because I used to sing in competitions. Believe it or not, I was a boy soprano and sang in competitions, stuff like that. And he said, you've got a voice and you can sing. And I loved music. And he said, there are all these bands about now. Get yourself into a band, become the lead singer. So you'll stand at the front and do the singing. And he said, girls like singers, as far as I can see. When I watch, they always watch the singer. So go get yourself a band and become a lead singer. And I did, and it worked. So and the thing was, I still wasn't very good at talking to them, but at least they approached me, which was quite nice. So that was, there was an unconventional way of finding a way around this natural shyness that I had. The other thing that he taught me, by the way, he said to me, Terence, you'll find that those boys, your friends, who are, you think, good at the chat up lines, he said, watch, because what usually happens with boys who think they're good at chatting, they'll go and stand with a girl and they'll say, hello, what's your name? Mary. That's great, Mary, I'm Terence, what a nice name. What do you do, Mary? Well, I do this, or I go to that school. And then it's, well, I go to this school, and let me tell you about me. And it is 5 seconds of interesting you and an hour and a half of boring me. And so that's what they do. And then they're surprised when the girl excuses themselves to go off to the loo, or, oh, my friend needs to speak to me. And he said, just keep asking questions. Just keep asking questions. Show an interest in them. And he said, first of all, you won't have to say very much, so your natural shyness, well, actually, that'll work. But you'll show an interest in them. And I've always carried that with me, because when I go into that room now of perfect strangers, and I want to stand in the corner with my glass of wine, I just keep asking people questions. But you know what? I find out so much, and I learn so much, and people are really interesting. So I actually, therefore, get over my natural shyness, but I find out and learn so much. So, entrepreneurs, unconventional. Now, if we look at this kind of NIPLC bit, what's that about? Well, it's about creating, growing, and sustaining enterprise. Okay, so creating enterprise, growing enterprise, and sustaining enterprise. And here's the interesting thing that I found. Again, I didn't start out knowing it, and it was working with John that got me to recognize it. So yes, it happened naturally, but I didn't have a structure to it in my mind. There are actually certain types of people who are very good at creating business. That's what we call entrepreneurs. They're the people who actually create new businesses by and large. But there are people who grow businesses that are already created, and they're really good at it. And there are people who sustain businesses. And actually, the balance of traits is very different in each of those. Now, they all might have a bit of entrepreneurial in them, a bit. They might all have a bit of enterprise in them, and they might have a bit of process or managerial skill. But the balance is very different in each, in my experience. So let's just look at that for a moment. So people who create businesses are primarily entrepreneurial. People who grow businesses are primarily enterprising. And enterprising and entrepreneurial are different. And people who sustain businesses are primarily process people and good at the managerial bit. Now, this is really important. One is not better than the other. They're just different. One is not better than the other. So an entrepreneur isn't better, more important, or of greater value than a person who's really good at process or a person who is enterprising. For a really good, successful, long-term, sustainable business, you need all three of those within any good organization. Now, who leads depends on where you are on the business cycle. So, again, let me just emphasize, entrepreneurs create business, enterprising people grow it, managerial or process people sustain it. Let's talk about the business cycle, because when young people go into business, they just see what's around them. They see the business as it is. They don't see it as it was. And quite often they can't think of where it's going because they are not party or they're not driving the strategy. So they just see it as it is. They see it as this existing entity. But actually, all businesses go through a cycle, and the speed of that cycle can be different, but they do go through a cycle. And let me tell you that the interesting thing is that there are 3 key cycles for any business. And if you look at different businesses around this province, you'll actually be able to see where they are in the cycle. And even the people who run them sometimes don't recognize where they are in the cycle. This is interesting because I'll come back to the 3 traits of entrepreneurialism, enterprise, and process. And then look at matching up the cycle, the business cycle, with who's best leading. What kind of person is best leading that business, given the part of the cycle that it's in. So the 3 kind of cycles for me, and these are just my words, okay? There's what I call the rising star. So, and let me give you an example of a rising star. So here, this is examples from real life. This is examples that I can tell you all the detail of because this is my life, right? This is part of my life. So, good example of a rising star. In Compass Group, which I got into, sometime I'll tell you the story of how I got there, but I got into Compass Group when it was part of a very, very big multidisciplined business. So this business, Grant Met, owned hotels. In fact, they owned the Europa Hotel. That's how I got in. Come back to that at some point, maybe. But so it owned hotels. It owned Express Dairies. It owned Truman's and Watney's Brewers. It owned what is now Diageo. So Grant Met has morphed into Diageo. So it owned some of the greatest drinks brands in the world. So J&B whiskey, Hennessy brandy, Smirnoff vodka. It owned Mecca Bookmakers. So it owned this whole tranche of businesses. Started up by one man who had been a refugee from Europe from the Second World War, Maxwell Joseph. So I joined them and go forward, and I was lucky in that I met an entrepreneur who became my boss, Jerry Robinson. Some of you might have heard of him. And Jerry did a management buyout from Compass Group. And I had moved up onto the group board by that point. And I was group sales and marketing director. So I was on the main board and I was very young. So I'd bluffed my way up to this board of this company. And Jerry brought us together as the directors and said, right, as you know, Grant Met are selling off all of these different parts of the business because they want to focus on the drinks and they want to take that global. They did that because they're now Diageo. But that means we're likely to get sold off, and we were the contract catering arm. Okay? So a pretty unsexy, mundane kind of business. And it was in a particular part of the business cycle, which I'll come back to. Jerry said, what we're going to do, because they'll sell us off, and the first thing that will happen when they sell us off, whoever buys us will get rid of the high-priced help. And by the way, in case you don't recognize, we're the high-priced help, so we'll be the first to go. I thought, blooming heck, I've just gotten here. I've just gotten onto the board. I don't want somebody buying us out and tossing me out my ear. So he said, we're going to do a management buyout. I would suggest, have I got your support? And of course, being the mouthy guy from Northern Ireland who wanted to try and make an impact with his new colleagues, I'm absolutely behind you, Jerry. I'm 100%. Let's do a management buyout. Great idea. I'm your man. And everybody then agreed, and I came out of the room. We agreed we were going to do it. And I went off to the phone, phoned a friend of mine who had gone to school with, who was then in the city as an investor. And I said, what's a management buyout? And that's true. What's a management buyout? I actually didn't know what the mechanics were. I knew it broadly meant we would end up owning the business, but I didn't know how you went about that. And by the way, because I was the group sales and marketing director, Jerry said to me, you're going to have to work with me because you're going to help me do the presentations to the city to raise the money. So you can imagine, young guy, didn't even know what a management buyout was, had to go and learn. And I met with my friend, and over a drink he took me through how management buyouts are done and what happens, what the repercussions are. Fast forward, I'm running one of the divisions within the new company, Compass Group, and we were just a UK and Ireland business. We're employing 19,000 people at that point. We bought the company for 187 million. It's not a lot of money in business now, but it was the largest management buyout in British history at that point. But we were only UK and Ireland. As part of an acquisition, there was a small piece of company that turned over £3 million that fell into my geography, and I was asked to go and have a look at it. And my chair said to me, do we sell it, do we close it, or do we grow it? 2 sides of A4, come back. I went off and had a look, talked to their client base, came back and said, I don't need 2 sides of A4. We need to put strong management in there. The market is going to explode that they're in, very niche market. We need to be first in. Roll forward, that turned over £3 million. Out of that I started and grew what became known as the global business for Compass Group. 3 million niche business. I left my division aside. I gave it to my number 2 within a year and focused entirely on this little £3 million niche business. 7 years later, it turned over $1.7 billion a year and was in 44 countries around the world. That's a rising star. Now, we got into a business early. We made a success of that early on, and therefore other people came to us, so the market came to us. And we put together a very specific business model that was right for that market. And our competitors didn't catch on. It probably took them 3 years to recognize what it was we were doing, by which time we were dominating the market. So I was very fortunate, both in the timing and the opportunity. Very fortunate that I did get, and I'll come to the kinds of people I got around me, but that's a rising star. 7 years, £3 million to $1.7 billion. 44 countries around the world. And there are businesses like that. There's a rising star, and you need very specific kinds of skills within that. But you might recognize for a business like that, you need somebody who is entrepreneurial, and you need the unconventional, because it needed to be structured in a wholly different way from the rest of the group was structured. And that, by the way, led to tensions with my fellow board members.
What type of business was it?
Well, what happened was we were basically a contract catering company. This little company did a range of services, but they did it in the first contract that was ever let by the Ministry of Defence, support services. And it was the time of Thatcher, and we all have views on Thatcher. I thank her for my success simply because she decided that the military in UK at that point had a major problem in terms of manpower. And they decided what they'd do is what the military called the teeth end, that they needed to have their manpower at the teeth end, and all the peripheral stuff, so they call caterers and blanket folders, as they call this, they needed actually to contract that out. So when I went along to this little company and I saw this, and I went and spoke to the MOD, and the MOD said, well, that's the first one, we're using that as a pilot, but we're going to do this. We need to do it. And I said, what kind of size of business would that be? And they had tens of thousands of people, tens of thousands. And I said, "Phew, that sounds like a business opportunity. And how are we doing it really well?" So I then started meeting with them and saying, okay, what would the program look like in terms of rolling it out? What are the big things that you're looking for? How are you going to tender it? And by the way, so they got key people to put the tenders together. So I went and spoke to them. And then, by the way, there were usually people who were coming toward the end of their careers. And I'd say, what are you going to do when you finish? Because they'd have served 22 years and have to go. But they're only in their 40s. What are you going to do after that? Well, we'll have our pension, but we'll probably want to work. Why don't you come and join me? So the people who wrote the tenders then started responding to the tenders. And it wasn't cheating, it was just, they knew what it was that was required. So that it started there, and then we said, why couldn't we do it for other military organisations around the world? And then I did a joint venture with the MOD, which nobody had done before. And then we said, who else uses support services? Well, oil and gas exploration, offshore and onshore. Why don't we talk to them and see if they would like somebody else to do that? And we did. And they did. And it just went mad. But A, we spotted the opportunity. B, we got alongside them. C, we changed the business model. And then we went, and who else could we do this for? But all the time, they used to call me the mole. And the reason they called me the mole, what does a mole do? It goes in and it digs, but it excavates, it pushes the dirt behind it. And I had people who then did the tunnel. So I just pushed ahead, and then they created the infrastructure, they created the tunnel. So that's a rising star. So it's a decent example of a rising star. So then you have a growth business where you need enterprising people. So you've now got a good business moving forward. So when we got to the point where we're now a 1.7 billion business, this is not, and our margins were almost twice what the rest of the group were, and we were growing exponentially. And that needed somebody like me who was prepared, who would be the mole, who would shoot forward, what else are we going to do and where are we going to do it? Now, the growth bit, you need people who recognize how they can keep growing either margin or volume in what is now an established, stable business. And one of the things that we recognized on the food part of our business, so now we were doing all sorts of things. We were providing transport, we were building camps and running them in far off places. So we had 2 10,000-man camps in Kazakhstan out where they were developing the oil fields, for example. So all strange things. But you need to keep growing a business. Now I'll take another business that they got me involved in, which was Moto. And Moto is the largest motorway services. You'll probably have to, you don't stop off them because you want to, you stop off because you need to. And particularly in my day, they were the kind of, they were the roadside greasy spoon, basically. The food was awful, but it was there. And they provided petrol, so when you stopped for your petrol and you were hungry or whatever, but you wouldn't stop there unless you had to. However, what transformed, so now you've got a good business, stable business, and what transformed it in terms of of it moving forward and dramatically changing its profile and dramatically changing its profitability was we introduced brands. We had this idea, instead of our own curled up cheese sandwich sitting on the counter praying that somebody will buy it, why don't we bring in Burger King and Pizza Hut and the things that people buy on the high street, the things that people want to buy. Why don't we bring them in? Why don't we do a deal with them? Because we'll help them expand their business into markets they've never been. So it's attractive for them. But now, whilst we may pay a franchise fee, the increased volumes and margin will more than offset the franchise fee. And let me give you an example. So we didn't only put them into motorway services, put them into railway stations. Massive footfall in railway stations in England. You think about King's Cross and St Pancras and Euston and so on and so forth. We bought a company that had been part of British Rail. It was called Travellers Fair. And we bought it because we recognised we wanted to get into places like railway stations. We saw that lots of customers. And they had this burger brand called Casey Jones. Anybody remember the old television Casey Jones thing? Casey Jones. So they had their burger brand called Casey Jones. In Euston Station, the first Burger King we put in, we replaced it like for like. So we didn't make it bigger or smaller, we just put it in the same footprint. The same place, same size. The profitability went up by over 30%. I mean sustainable, not first week. Simply because of the brand. It was the power of the brand. And we brought some other brands in like Pizza Hut. But the other thing that we did, we created some of our own brands. And what do? We set them alongside. So alongside Burger King, we would put upper crust. Anybody seen upper crust? Kind of baguette, fresh, all of that. And we got what they call the halo effect. So because you're a major brand beside it, it actually carried off to the other brand. And it created a brand for us that got brand recognition and therefore had greater value. So there's taking what is a good, already established, strongly established market and brand organization and company, and now being enterprising and doing something different with it that creates momentum. That's enterprising. That's not entrepreneurial, that's enterprising. So it's taking a good company and then doing something, injecting some more life into it. And you need enterprising people. When that shooting star starts to wane, get your enterprising people in there. What's the next stage? What's the next stage? So that's the kind of growth business, that's the enterprising part, and I'll come back to each of these just in terms of the people. And then you have this sustaining a business, which is, this is a mature business. So you get mature businesses, okay, who well, the contract catering business for us was the, forgive the pun, it was the bread and butter. It provided high volume but low margin. It's what I call feeding the machine. So it employed a lot of people. It was the basis upon, it's very low risk, very low risk. However, it's a very mature business. So we were providing canteens in factories and offices. We were providing nice boardroom lunches as well. We're providing school canteens. We were in business and industry. We were in schools and education. We were in hospitals, etc. Contract catering. Safe, business, but it's a mature business. That business was not going to grow dramatically. And indeed, you could see the market was going to change over time, and therefore actually it was going to diminish. So it's a mature business. But it was a very large business. This is the business that employed 19,000 people, for goodness sake. And it still provided a lot of profit. You needed to work hard to get it because the margins were low. You needed to employ a lot of people to get it. But nonetheless, there's a good example of a mature business. Now, the best companies or the best groups, of course, put a mix of those three things together. You've got the mature business that sustains a profitability, a level of profitability that is safe and the city-like, because it's pretty safe stuff and it's pretty predictable. Then you have businesses that are in growth, like Moto. Brands, wow. We then put them into airports, we put them into train stations, we put them on motorway services. Wow, that was a growing business, a very enterprising business. And then you've got the shooting stars. And they're high risk. So you've now got a portfolio of risk. And you've got a portfolio that is actually self-sustaining and self-serving. So you've got the mature base that is safe. You've got the growing business that's pretty exciting in itself, it's enterprising, and then you've got these shooting stars. And some of them might fail, but the rest still remains. So you can afford to take greater risk in the shooting stars, and boy did they take some risks with us. In fact, the first overseas contract, we won it, which was RAF Akrotiri in Cyprus. We won all the support services for RAF Akrotiri. I phoned my chairman. He and I got on really well, and that's why I phoned him instead of chief exec. And I said to Francis, great news for you, Francis. We've just won a very big contract with the RAF. Oh, fantastic! Congratulations. What size is it? He's an accountant, but the best marketeer I've ever seen. But he said to me, of course, first questions are, what is it? Contract with the RAF. How big is it? Told him. How profitable is it going to be? Told him. He said, fabulous. We'll have a celebration. And I said, he said, where is it? And I said, Akrotiri. And he said, Akrotiri? Where's Akrotiri? And I said, Cyprus. Silence. He said, let me just get this right. You've taken us overseas to Cyprus without permission of the board. And I said, well, technically it's not overseas. And he said, why? I said, because RAF bases their sovereign territory. And he said, don't be smart, Terence. Don't be smart. And he said, right, we're going to have to manage this carefully in terms of your colleagues on the board. And he said, what would be helpful is if you write your resignation, we'll put it in an envelope, we'll stick it in my desk, and if it goes badly wrong, you go. And I said to him, that's fair, but can we add one rider to it? And he said, what's that? I said, if I go, can I take the contract with me? Because it's overseas. And he said, you're really pushing your luck. But they backed me. And it was a big risk, because I hadn't got permission. And some people say I have that awful trait of not asking permission, asking for forgiveness. So doing it and then going and asking for forgiveness. That's, so there you have examples of rising star, an enterprising business and a mature business. Now, let's go back to people. Rising star, let's align them now. Who are you going to get? Who's going to create and run a rising star? If you look at those three, entrepreneurs, enterprising people and process people, who are you going to put in charge of that? entrepreneur every time. You just got to, because it's actually the entrepreneur that will create it, almost certainly. It won't happen by itself. They'll spot an opportunity within a business, within a market, within a sector, and they will then take the risk and go and have a go. The motto needs an enterprising person at the top. Needs to have somebody who can look at what's the next stage going to be and how we're going to get there. And with a great guy in terms of we put in there who was very enterprising. And then the mature business, you need good process people because they need to eke out every penny. They need to look in every corner. It needs to be well managed in a very stable way. So you can see that you, now turning on its head, entrepreneur, never, ever, ever put me in charge of a mature business. Ever. I'll be bad for it, it'll be bad for me. Because you know what I do? I have a low boredom threshold, and most entrepreneurs do. I have a low boredom threshold. So what I'll do is I'll either tinker and mess it about, which is not what it needs. It's a safe business. It's there for a purpose. Keep it safe. Don't start taking big risks. You know, don't play Monopoly with it. So don't put somebody like me in charge of it. Make sure that you give it to a very good process person. Now, here's the important thing. It doesn't mean, because the other thing you don't want, seeing a rising star, they can't, don't try to populate it with lots of entrepreneurs. They'll get in each other's way. They just get in each other's way. And they try to take it off in all sorts of directions. So you have moles traveling out all over the place. So that's an issue as well. So what you do is you need the mix. And I said to you earlier, I did something instinctively which John put structure to in my head. Always what I did, I had a very good operational person on my right hand side and a really good finance person on my left hand side, and by their nature they are process and managerial people. They are by their nature. And I put them alongside me. So I would create the momentum and they would ensure that it delivered operationally and financially. And the processes were put in place to ensure that it maintained momentum. Really important. So I recognized I needed those people if this was going to be a success, and I've always done that. And the first thing I do when I'm getting involved in anything new is look around for those people. Who's going to manage this for me? Who's going to take the process and make sure that it works? And I look for enterprising people then after that and go, right, who's going to come up with the next ideas? Who's going to build this? That's why I said right at the beginning, entrepreneurs are not more important than enterprising people, and they're not more important than process people. All of them are equally important. It's just recognizing how they're used and actually blending them, which is incredibly important. So in our search within your campuses, when we're searching for whether it be staff and or students, when we're searching for where are the entrepreneurs, we also need to ensure that when we recognize them, and he has the process for recognizing them, when we recognize them, that we team them with good process people and enterprising people. And they've got to understand that they need each other. They've got to understand and accept and embrace the fact that they will not be successful unless they work together. And they'll learn from each other. You'll find a bit of the entrepreneurial spirit will rub off on the others, And you'll find that the others, like myself, will learn so much. So can I read a balance sheet? Yes, I can. Can I put a business plan together? Yes, I can. Do I like doing it? No. But I can do it because I recognize that was a route to success. And I do things that I hate if they need to get done in order to reach the goal. So the things that I don't like doing, like writing a business plan, I'll do, and I'll do it really well. And I'll get somebody, a process person, to look at it. But I'll do it if I have to, because it's about the goal. It's about the goal. And I never, ever, ever lose sight of it's getting me to there. I don't want to do it. I'll do it. So, I'm going to give you a few examples here, different examples of entrepreneurial behavior within an entrepreneurial business and even within stable businesses. And they are not, so it's not the conventional entrepreneur, let me start a new business and see what we can do, let me create a rising star. It's spotting an opportunity and doing something with it. Or even spotting a difficulty and doing something with it. The first one I'm going to take you to is Chevron Texaco. So I'm now running the global business for Compass Group. And one of the biggest, well, not one of, the biggest contract ever for support services came out to the market. Chevron and Texaco were two different, very large American oil companies, came together. Now you've got a massive American oil giant, and they decided to put all of their support services, soft and technical, worldwide, out in a single contract. Now this contract became, we grew it to $500 million a year. One single contract. This is what we grew it to. When it came out, and I'll tell you at the end, it started off at $250 million. How did it become $500 million? It started off, it looked like $250 million a year contract. I'll tell you that at the end. Now, we were in competition, but there were only 3 players who could take that contract on. Sodexo, which is French. There's an American company, and ourselves as Compass Group, or my global division. There were only 3 who had the capacity and capability and experience who could possibly take on such a large contract. And it ranged from obviously oil terminals and offices in their headquarters campus in San Francisco, out to support services and oil platforms out in Gulf of Mexico, out in the North Sea. It went to oil bases, camps in Angola and places like Kazakhstan. It went to oil exploration up in Alaska. And it went to grease plants, because it's a byproduct, in places like Brazil. So very diverse, massive, etc., etc. And everything from setting up camps to, in Kazakhstan, for example, we had over 650 different vehicles of everything from cranes to major engineering plant to buses. And we had to maintain them, as well as feed everybody and look after the security and put on the entertainment, etc., etc. Now, there are 3 companies now bidding for it, and I get my team together, and we had a specialist bid team. And I said, right, we have to win this, because whoever wins this is going to be the most important sports services company in the world, just by this single contract. So we have to win it. And of course, what everybody will be thinking about is price. The client will, we will, the competitors will. And everybody's going to look to shave their margin. So the other two are going to look to shave their margin to win the contract and then see if they can make it up later. We're just going to look at it in a wholly different way from everybody else. Because of course I'd already sat down and thought through how do we do it in a different way. So you think of the volume of $250 million a year and what that delivers in foodstuffs, in uniforms, in plant and equipment, and I mean it's massive. Now, we've got a supply chain. And suddenly my supply chain are going to get $250 million a year more business. Because that's what the $250 million is made up of. It's made up of all of the men and materials and everything else. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leverage our supply chain. So I'm going to get them together and say, if I guarantee if we get it, you get it, what are you going to give me? So I took the margin out of the supply chain. I aggregated all of our volume, so not just the $250 million, but all the rest of the business that I had. I aggregated all of that, and I said, there's the price for you. What are you going to give me? And what they gave me, I handed over to the client. But I protected my margin, so I went in with the same margin that I normally did. But I took the price down through the supply chain. And surprise, surprise, we won it. Because I was able to tell the client two things. I can sustain that price because I'm going to show you how we did it. But better than that, I can sustain the supply chain, whatever. And here's why, because I got them all to sign up. I'll give you the business, but you have to sign up to this. So I went in with the contracts, but then with a cost reduction, which was very significant. But went in with a very big margin because somebody else paid for it. But it was in their interests because it increased their business dramatically. And they were able to say they were part of the largest, they supplied the largest contract in the world. That was just a different way of looking at it. As a rider to that, by the way, I'd love to say this was my idea, it wasn't. As a rider to that, and the day we were signing the contract, I was in San Francisco with the guy who headed up procurement around the world for Chevron Texaco, a guy called Helmut Porkert, who was a naturalized Austrian. And he and I were signing the contract, and we had formed a virtual board, which I was going to chair. It was between the two organizations. And I had this thing of, when we signed a new contract, I would buy a new expensive, nice pen, and when we signed the contract, I would give it to them as a thank you. And I handed the pen to Helmut, and we're going to have lunch with the whole team, his and mine. And he said to me, where are you off to next? And I said, Atlanta. What are you going to Atlanta for? I said, actually, we, Compass Group, are having our board meeting down there. You're headquartered in London, why are you having it in Atlanta? We're meeting up with Coca-Cola, because we're one of their largest customers. They've invited us there, have our board meeting there, and meet with their board. He said, how much do you buy from Coca-Cola? I said, couldn't tell you off the top of my head, but we're one of their biggest. He said, we buy a massive amount of Coca-Cola. I said, an oil company? He said, we have 21,000 gas stations, Terence. 21,000 gas stations, we sell a lot of Coke. Cut long story short, he and I cut a deal then and there. I phoned our procurement up to get our best price for the standard size pack. We looked at what his price was, what our price was. We were a bit cheaper. we took $12 million a year out of the price by putting the two of them together. So we bought it for them, and we shared that. Now, we had just, his idea, not mine, but we had just made $12 million by, again, thinking slightly differently about the procurement bit. So I went down to the board meeting. Boy, was I a hero, because I was now bringing with me the Chevron Texaco $250 million contract, as it was at that point. And by the way, I've got another $6 million here at no cost, just to go to our bottom line. How did it turn from $250 million into $500 million? A lot of it came from two companies coming together, Chevron and Texaco, not having an accurate picture of their own business. Talked about a grease plant in Brazil. That's 66 grease plants around the world, and that hadn't been in the contract. Why? They just missed it off. They just missed it off in the database. And so on and so forth. And they'd taken a picture of the business in time, but it was 2 years previous, so of course it had grown. So all of that, and it grew. So by the time we took it over, started rolling it out, it had grown to almost $500 million. So that's entrepreneurial. It's not a new business. It is taking a different approach to an existing business. East Timor. Anybody know where East Timor is? Just north of Australia. Timor Straits, across East Timor. It was run by Indonesia. Whole uprising, threw the Indonesians out, burnt most of Dili, which is the capital, in doing so. And we were doing a lot of business for the Australian forces, as we had for British forces. And the Australians were going in first. They were going to send the UN peacekeeping in, and the Australians were going in first as a kind of, because they were nearest. And you couldn't get anything in, so there was obviously no boats, no commercial aircraft going in. I saw it as an opportunity, because I knew UN peacekeepers would go in. And I knew infrastructure would need to be replaced in East Timor. Still a bit of unrest there. Australians were preparing to go in. I flew up north, met up with the general who was, and the colonel who were responsible for the Australians going in. And I said, I'd like you to take me in with you. And I'd worked with them, obviously, because we were supplying support services to the Australian military. Terence, can't go in, you know, we've got to go in there and sort it out, and then the UN are coming in behind us. And said, there's a truck out there, and it's full of crates of beer, cigarettes, and a few cases of whiskey that you can take with you for your boys and girls, as long as I get on the same transport that it's on. So I ended up in a C-130, flew into East Timor with the Australian forces. And when I got in there, the UN officials had come in to see what they needed to do. And of course, everybody's intense, actually intense as well. And they're thinking, no infrastructure, how are we going to do this? And I met up with a woman who headed up the UN contingent with two of her staff, and said, the harbour's working, been down there, you need accommodation for your people coming in quickly. I could organise a couple of flotels. What's a flotel? I said, well, I've used them in Shetland when they were doing the oil production there. There wasn't enough accommodation, so we brought in these floating hotels. I said, I could get a couple of flotels, sail them down and stick them in Dili Harbour. What a great idea. And I said, yeah, but in order for me to capture them, to sign them up, I need a contract. I got the contract. And the competition hadn't even gotten into the country yet. So when they arrived, they saw two signs in Dili Airport. Welcome to the world's newest democracy, said at the top. Beneath that, they allowed me to put up a sign up, Compass Group welcome their competitors to East Timor. And we already had the contracts signed up. That's entrepreneurial behaviour. Just they didn't think of it, they didn't do it, and we captured the market before they'd arrived. Because we come up with some solutions to what were issues for the client. And they couldn't afford to wait around to put together tenders and all of the rest of it. They were in crisis. And of course, surprise, surprise, we had already signed up other businesses by the time everybody else arrived as well. And we ran the local bakery as well. Final one, you'll be pleased to hear. I said to you, it's not just business that needs entrepreneurs. It is social enterprise. So it is the community and voluntary sector, it is the education sector, etc. We're going for a contract. We're in South Africa. We bought a South African company. I'm chairing it. We're going for a contract in Mozambique because we want to get into Mozambique, but they're going to build an aluminium smelter, which means they're going to have this big camp for all the construction workers. I want the contract for that camp because it not only gives me a very profitable business, but it takes us into a new territory. So it's a no-cost entry into an area of strategic importance. For group, that's incredibly important. That's smart thinking from there. They used to call it our footprint strategy. We would create the footprint and the rest would come in behind us. So the client is going to be the people who are building the aluminium smelter. So after speaking to the client, I flew up to Mozambique, to Maputo, and I met with a lady who was running the largest NGO, and the lady was called Graça Machel, who became Nelson Mandela's wife, but before that she had been married to the president of Mozambique and he was killed in an air crash. Incredibly smart woman, very, very bright, very charismatic. And I went to meet her and I said, okay, here's what I'm looking at doing, but in doing it, what I need to understand is what are the key issues for you in your communities? What are the key issues for you that perhaps we could help with? And she said, it's very simple. It's our children in terms of their education and our women in terms of their education. If we could set something up that helped educate our children and set something up that helped educate our women, and we need them educated separately because the mothers will not want to be educated with their children for all the reasons you'd understand. I said, no problem at all. I said, let me think about that. I came back to her a little time later. I flew back up, met with her, and I said, right, here's the idea. In the camp, we will have 2 major dining rooms. The guys, it's mostly men, come in the morning. They stay on the camp, they live on the camp. They come in the morning, they have their breakfast. They then take a packed lunch out. They go out into the field to build the smelter. They come back in after work. They sit down and have dinner. And then they have some recreation and then they go to bed. When they've left in the morning with their lunch pack, one dining room will bring the children into, the other will bring the women into. We'll give you breakfast, because all it costs us is the food element. We've got all the labour there anyway, we're making it anyway, we've got the space there anyway. We'll make them breakfast. We will bring teachers in, so students who are learning to be teachers, take a year out. Some of them will be from Mozambique, and if we have to bring them up from South Africa, we will do. They'll stay on the camp as well. They'll teach the children and the women. They'll have lunch together, so they'll bring them together for lunch. And then when the men come back at night, they can have dinner with their wives and children. And when this is over, when the aluminium smelter's been built, we'll leave the classrooms, we'll leave the dining rooms. But by the way, it costs us more to take them away than it does to leave them. And we've written them off over the term of the contract anyway. And who's paying for the buildings? The client. Because we're charging it them. Who's paying for the food? The client. What are we paying for? The teachers. That's it. That's it. And we left that as a legacy. Now, when we went to do the presentation to the client in competition, I had a letter from Graça Michelle to say she fully supported what we were going to do, and here's why. She even said she'd come to the presentation if we wanted her to. Now they were going to be, now Mozambique's going to be the host country for this company coming in. Who are they going to give the contract to? But it created social good as well, so it became a social enterprise. We created a social enterprise to deliver that part of it. That social enterprise still exists today. That's entrepreneurial behaviour, but in a social context. So entrepreneurs are to be found everywhere. They do have certain traits which he is able to find, and they are in every walk of life, every shape and type, but they cannot exist successfully alone. You need enterprising people, you need process people, and they need to come together. Then you get not only a very successful business, but you have a very sustainable business. You put that together, you put that thinking together in terms of enterprising, entrepreneurial, and process. You put it into government, you put it into civic society, you put it into the voluntary and community sector. You put it in, most importantly, into education, training and development. Now you have Northern Ireland PLC. Now you can start to recreate what we had here before. The most enterprising, entrepreneurial, successful economy that had been seen for such a small place ever. We could rival Singapore. Questions?
Anyone? Suggestions, questions, contributions?
Challenge, yeah, whatever. I started off singing in bands, blues bands. I then got into sales and marketing, and there was a job going with Grant Med. And don't tell anybody this, but I lied on my CV. and I went to work for Grant Med. And why I went to work for Grant Med, what I saw there was this big conglomerate that had a place in Northern Ireland, so Europa Hotel. It also had Gilby's Gin, which had offices here as well. And I wanted to join a really big organisation where I thought I might have a chance to grow. And I didn't know what my capacity would be, but they were so big, I found that I thought that I would probably be able to find my niche, and I happened therefore into what they did was they spotted something in me here, and they sent me over to London, and they sent me over to learn the different businesses, But I went early into the contract catering side, which is the very unsexy side, because hotels, you think about it, hotels are fantastic, drinks, business in terms of worldwide marketing, all of that, and I find myself in the contract catering side. But the sheer size of it, 19,000 people, it's like and it was all over the country. And they liked me, they seemed to like me, and early on they put me into training, funny enough. But there is no better way to learn a subject than to have to teach a subject. I know that from doing training. I learnt more, so I had no background in catering, but I learnt more about contract catering through the training department than I ever did in working in it, because you have to understand the nuts and bolts. And that was really good for me. So, look, I don't want to underplay the fact that I worked pretty hard, but it was easy because I really liked working. But I got so many, I just happened to find myself in the right place so many times. You kind of look around and how did that happen? So that's how I got into catering. It was the organisation I wanted, not necessarily that.
Just for information, we're streaming this live, so we're trying to pick it up from the microphone. So if you do have a question, we'll pick up the microphone, and then people online.
Yeah, I'm not going to sing, so that's it. Two questions. One, you've talked about a lot of successes. I'm assuming there must have been some failures, because they said you're not learning unless there's been failures. And the second question, really, another one would be about motivating the team. I mean, you've 19,000 employees. There must be a few problems coming along with that. So those are the two questions.
Two very good questions, and I will A, fully, and B, honestly answer both of them. Failures, yeah. In fact, I was sacked twice in my career, and it's the most awful feeling. That feeling of failure, that you've not just failed yourself, but you failed your family. And that was because of my unconventional approach. I just saw it in a different way from my boss. And I don't mean my boss was wrong. In fact, I think in both cases they were probably right. Because this is me, entrepreneurial behaviour in what was mature businesses. So wrong fit, and my behaviour wasn't appropriate for the business. So they were right to sack me, but it was a dreadful feeling at the time. Really bad feeling. And by the way, one of the things I learnt from that, and I will answer your second question, one of the things I learnt from that was a painful lesson that my father had told me always to remember, particularly if you become a manager. And I understood it in here, but I've got it in here now, and that is, he said to me, it's a word's not used very often now. My father was very wise, and he said to me, son, think to remember, if you are ever contemplating sacking someone or making them redundant, he said, I don't care what word you want to use for it, but taking somebody's job away, remember this. When you meet someone for the first time, you normally ask them 3 questions. What's your name? Where are you from? What do you do? What's your name? Where are you from? What do you do? And he said, when you take their job away, you've taken a third of who they are. It's an important part of who they are. So when somebody asks you, if you lost your job, when somebody asks you, what do? You either lie or I did, or it's not a nice feeling, and I found myself in that position. So I have failed, and the good thing is that I genuinely don't brood on things. It hurts, and I'm quite an emotional person as well, and I can still, when I talk about it, I still get that feeling back. It's just such an awful feeling. But I do have the ability to go, what am I going to do next? And it is that thing of what am I going to do? Whether it's a failed business or a failure in job, it's what am I going to do next? So what do I need to do here? And I get myself into that pretty quickly. In terms of people, a range of people you have working for you and with you, my first leadership job. So a region that they were going to put me into. And honestly, I didn't know whether they were putting me into it to teach me a lesson or they genuinely thought I would be the right person for it. But the region was failing. And it was losing clients, and it was not reaching its budgets at all. And they appointed me as the director, and it was my first director's role. So I wasn't going to say no. So I didn't take it for the challenge. It was like I took it because they were giving me a director's role. But I looked at it very carefully, and I looked at what the issues were. And before I met with the team, I met with my dad. And he and I went for a drink. Came home and he and I went for a drink, and I said to him, you know, I've got this job, congratulations. So I said, actually, that's not why I'm telling you. I said, it is a problem child, and and I'm not sure about the best way of dealing with it. And I said, if I'm to be crude about it, Dad, you know, is it I go in and kick ass, or go in and, you know, be Mr. Nice Guy? I'm not sure about the best way of dealing with it. And he said to me, and it's one of these stories I tell a lot because I carry it with me when I'm talking to young managers. And he said to me, do you know how they train dolphins? I thought he'd gone cuckoo. I thought, he's had too much drink here. But feed them fish. He said, no, son, first thing they do when they're going to train dolphins is they get in the water alongside them to show them they mean them no harm. How smart is that? They get in the water alongside them to show them they mean them no harm. That's what you need to do. And it's true. So when there are difficulties, it's easy as the boss to come along and shout the odds, or tell them what the issues are, or that they're letting the company down, or themselves down, or their teams down, or whatever. It's actually getting alongside them and understanding what the issues are. And then saying, right, we all now see the same picture. Now what are we going to do about it? And it's not what are you going to do about it, what are we going to do about it? And how are we going to do it? And what does success look like? Do we have the same picture of success? And then how are we going to ensure that we're delivering on that picture of success? And it's more straightforward than people allow. They try to overcomplicate it. And it is that. It's sharing the failure, sharing the plan, sharing the picture of success, and then making sure you do your part in delivering it. And then you have a right to expect that they do their part. And if they do not, they'll recognize it. Because now you've got a shared success, a picture of success for each of them. And they'll recognize it. That's the important thing.
Thank you, Simon. From your experience, how much of being an entrepreneur is an appetite for risk taking? And right the way then down through from being an enterprising person, would he or she have an appetite for less risk than an entrepreneur?
Another very good question. Entrepreneurs by their nature do have and I guess there are two things working simultaneously. A greater appetite for risk and a less fear of failure. And sometimes my dad, by the way, that fear of failure bit, my dad used to refer to it as having a less of a sense of self-preservation. So that mechanism that we all have kicks in, that says, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. You know, put your hand in the fire, don't do it, don't do it, do it, don't do it. I think that entrepreneurs probably have less of that. So the mechanism is less refined. But I do think that there is a greater appetite for risk. Now there can be recklessness, and that's, because everything can get exaggerated, and that's why, by the way, that is why it is so important to have those other people alongside you, because you need to understand the consequences of the risk. It's not just the size of the risk, but the consequences if they go wrong. And what I carry with me in here is a little risk register, and this is born through experience. So I would naturally have it. I've developed it, and this risk register is about what's the likelihood of that risk arising, and what's the impact if it does. One multiplied by the other, you kind of go. So if it's unlikely, it's 1 out of 10. But if its impact is massive, it's 10. So you've now scored 10. But you might have something, the likelihood is 3, but the impact is 2. That's 6. Take that one. So it's that kind of, I do that, and it's a natural thing that I do inside my head now. Probability times impact. So I do this P times I thing in my head. But I've learnt that wasn't innate. But so they tend to have a greater appetite for risk, and it is our biggest concern in dealing with government. And I've run a lot of government contracts. The appetite for risk is very low, because for them the consequences are very high. The impact for them is very high. So naturally their appetite is low, and therefore it was difficult. It's difficult for an entrepreneur dealing with government, because they're actually opposite ends of the spectrum, normally.
Could I say something about risk, just outside of his own experience? Because Terry's talked a lot about the success he had with this my mind just can't compute the billions and everything like that. But what's important to realise was that at a certain point, then a few years ago, he gave all that up and risked everything to start a company in Northern Ireland, his own company. So again, this issue of risk is absolutely central to thinking about entrepreneurialism, because there he had it made, and yet he was willing to take that step again. And there's something from the brain point of view, there's something about this question of the amygdala and the brainstem, that what is a threat to other people is not the same threat to entrepreneurs. But that's not saying he wasn't nervous about it or he wasn't scared about it, but he was willing to do it.
It's actually a good point. I hadn't really thought about it, John, and this is why he and I are a good team, and we do a lot of different things together, because I don't recognise, because some things I see as happening to me or just I've done, and haven't always thought it through in that context. And John's right. Here I was sitting on the group board of what is a FTSE top 25 company. So it's a market cap today of 22 billion. And I was sitting on the group board. You can imagine I was earning a lot of money, and my bonus was uncapped, and I had shares and share options. It's a great lifestyle, and they send you around the world first class. It is, for a boy from Belfast who, just to go back to where I was, a boy from Belfast who did the milk round for a bag of broken biscuits, and we were evicted 4 times, and so that was massive. But I did get to the point where I said, actually, I need to do this for myself, so I need to take a risk here. I could settle into this, but I know what's going to happen. I'm going to become pretty useless at this, because I'll be in a comfort zone that I don't belong, that isn't good for me. It's why I'll never retire. It's not grasping for money, it's this. I need to keep this tuned and working. So I went to my wife, and I have 3 kids, and I said, I want to go and borrow the money to buy this company. It means I'm going to have to give up the job, give up the share options, all of that, and we'll have to risk everything. So the house will be on the line, everything. But it's what I want to do, and this is the plan. If you don't want to do it, then we'll not do it, because you don't have the right to pull everybody into that. You know, this is us together. We need to make the decision, but I'd like to do it, and here's why, and this is what I think it can deliver. And because she married me for who I am, not what I am, so she went, okay, if that's what you really want. We talked it. I mean, we didn't. You know, we talked it through in depth. Let's do it. Let's have a go. There's a nice rider to that, which was I borrowed £21 million to buy this company, and I flew home. And by the way, I looked for a company for 2 years to get the right one. I had a set criteria, 5 criteria that I needed this company to have before I would buy it. And I found it, and it happened to be in Northern Ireland. And by the way, I was dead lucky there, because it was being sold to a large multinational, and the person who was selling it didn't like them, and they let him down. They put it off for a month, and they were going to do the deal. They put it back, but his word was his bond. He expected them to do the same. And I told him if he ever thought of selling it, to talk to me. And he phoned me up and said, here's where we're at. I met him in a coffee shop in Arthur Street. And I said, what was the deal? And he said, oh, my advisors would be telling me not to tell you. And I went, if you want to do it quickly, if you tell me the deal, I'll tell you whether I can do it or not. He told me the deal. At the table, I wrote it down on the menu. And I said, sit there, Richard, just a minute, bear with me. And I rang my key advisor, said, this is the deal for this company. And we had tracked him. We had wanted to buy it, but he had told me he was selling it. And he said, right, come round, we'll get the structure put together this afternoon. Yes, that's the kind of deal we could do. So I said to him, you're on. We agreed a time scale for doing it. And we were 1 day late, and that was delayed on his side. And it was the best deal I've ever done in my life. But here's the rider. I did the deal. I went round to my mum's house, and my mum, my dad unfortunately had died by then. So my mum's living on her own. She always kept the front door open. Always. She said she'd never bar the door to her children. So I went through and pushed the other door, and I knew she was at home, because the front door was open, but more importantly, she loved, absolutely adored opera, and it was blaring. But she wanted to be able to hear it wherever she was in the place, in the flat, blaring out. And I go in, and she's in the kitchen as usual, little dog there, and she said, and it's like I hadn't seen her maybe for a month or whatever, because I wasn't living in Northern Ireland. How you doing, ma? I said, what are you doing here? So I said to her, I've got some good news. What's the good news? I said, I'm moving back home. She said, good news for who? I said, thanks very much. I said, why are you coming home? Have you been sacked? She said, I went, no. I said, ban a company? You're buying a company? Yeah, buying a company in Northern Ireland. It's called Maben. The one with these wee vans running about the place, and they do cleaning and stuff. I went, that's them. Ah, you know them. I said, okay, well, we're buying it. I said, how much is that costing? I said, £21 million. Where'd you get £21 million? She said, I hope it's nothing to do with that bank robbery, that Northern Bank robbery. She did, that's... And that was me. That was me making the big step from being a big corporate, although I'd been running my own division and running it in an entrepreneurial way, to then going, do you know what? Another roll of the dice, as it were. You need to be doing this for yourself. Best thing I ever did. I still today love companies. I still am in touch with them all. I've still got shares in it. Such a great organisation that was so good to me and taught me such a lot, but I needed to do my own thing. So there was the risk. That was high risk.
Can I add some I want to try and take this full circle because Terry's told you about the success in his own business. He sold the business in Northern Ireland and so on. But he and I were sitting in McGilligan prison about 5 months ago, and it was part of a project. We were looking at this question of risk. Potentially, some guys are in prison because they took too much risk. And so I was asked if I'd profile some prisoners, and we discovered 4 of the prisoners who came out as strongly potentially entrepreneurial. And so having identified them, they all had a business idea. Now some of these guys have been in prison for 8 and more years, but they had a business idea. But their worry was, number 1, they had a prison sentence. Number 2, no one would lend them money having been in prison, and would they even get a job when they came out? And so at that point, I've had a strong sort of conviction for a long time that if you put people who are potentially entrepreneurial in front of put an entrepreneur in front of them, something goes off. I mean, I'm hoping that's even happening this afternoon, just as you listen to Terry's stories, something goes off in them. And so I invited Terry to come and meet the 4 men, and very generously he drove all the way up to McGilligan to meet them. So these men who are sitting in cells during the day are sitting down now with the chair of NI Tourism, etc., etc. And Terry's talking to them and saying, now tell me your idea. And they're bringing up the problem of finance. He says, forget about the finance. They're bringing up the problem with their sentence. Forget about your sentence. Tell me your idea. And he took them really seriously, all 4 of them. All 4 of them had very different ideas. And they went out of the room on air because they were being allowed to think entrepreneurially. They were talking together entrepreneurially in a way that they'd never been able to do before. And Terry, again, I'm very, very thankful to him for this, offered to come and see them again. And he said, next time we're going to talk about your idea. And what he did was he gave each of them homework. And he said, now this is your idea. I want you to do this, this, and this by the time we meet again. If you do your part, I'll help you the next stage. And they've done their homework. Even to the extent that one of the men who got out, last time we were up there, there were only 3 of the 4 there. And Terry said, well, where's so-and-so? And they said he's got out. He's in Uri. And Terry said, well, like, how can we get in touch with them? You know, I'm not just in this for the sake of the fact you're in McGilligan. So the prison couldn't give me his details, and I heard that I'd have to go to the probation service to find out. So I was about to do that when the chap emailed me off my website, said, I'm still keen to follow the entrepreneurial approach. Could I meet Terence again? We met in a cafe in Belfast 2 weeks ago. I said to him, but you're going to have an idea to put to Terry. And he came with his idea. Interestingly, it was an area of a cleaning service that Terry was familiar with, as Resource did as well. Terry gave him more homework. He's away to do more homework, and we're hoping to meet with him again. And so what I'm really trying to say is that, you know, Terry's story is fantastic, but you go back to where he was when he was younger. No one was really encouraging him to think that way. And if we can catch, these are men in prison who just are being given the opportunity, and suddenly each one of them is going to end up running a business, for instance, and they never thought they could have been doing so. So this is really where the heart of what we're trying to talk about is, if we can reach yourselves, who can reach the students, who can reach into education and light that fire for some folk who've never thought that that could be the way that they would go in the future, it would be absolutely tremendous. That's what today's about.
I think one of the other important parts of what John said there, and there is that thing of, I'm not going to give you my commitment unless you give me your commitment. And the homework is very practical stuff in terms of they had to do to further their idea. But the single most important thing, they all had this major hang up, understandably, about, but no one will give me the money, no one will lend me the money. And I said, forget about the money, because if your idea is good enough, I'll find somebody who'll put it, because they'll buy the idea, they'll fund the idea, doesn't matter who it is, doesn't matter who has the idea. So don't worry about the money. And I would say the same, to you or to students or to anybody else. Don't start thinking about the money first. You get the idea, and if the idea is good enough and if it's then put together well enough, believe me, the money will follow the idea. Believe me, the money will follow, whether it's funding here with entrepreneurial ideas, whether it's funding, in the public sector or the private sector, the money will follow the idea, believe me. And it's focus on the idea and making it real.
I really would like to thank John and Terence for what I think was actually absolutely inspiring. I haven't risen to the heights of Terence, but I've discovered that Terence and I have something in common. We were both milkmen. I know why he succeeded further than I, because I was paying my helpers in Suki orange juice, and his entrepreneurial milkman was actually giving him broken biscuits, and I reckon that was probably cheaper. Should have been working for you. Yeah, and I'd be out of business then, because you'd have taken it over. I think there are three things here, maybe three words I want to use here. About education's one of them, and John has said about we've been talking around this for years. The other one is about nurturing, has been mentioned about nurturing, and the third one in this is about environment. Now, my wife worked in the local primary school. On a wet day, with the P1 kids, she couldn't go out in the playground, so she'd give them a piece of paper and said, make something. And they were making airplanes and robots and ships and rocket ships and so forth and so on. On a wet day with P7s, she'd give them a piece of paper and said, make something. What shall we make, miss? What do you want us to make, miss? What shall we do, miss? Now that's what the educational environment has done. It has beaten out of those kids enterprise and entrepreneurship. It is actually saying to those kids, you must conform to being the person that just actually turns the handle in the machine. Now, those are important people. Those are the groups, the people that do the processing at the bottom. But what we're doing is we're creating a country of just processors. And that's what we're trying to change here. So what we're trying to do now is to create the environment and to nurture those people who are enterprising and are entrepreneurs. And as Michael said at the start, we're going to form this entrepreneurial club, Entrepreneurs Club. We actually don't know exactly where it's going. We're going to we've got a naming mark here, and we're going to actually do something. We're not just going to talk about doing something, we're going to be doing something. And we're going to learn as we go along as we do that. So I'm delighted that, as I said, that we have got the wise guidance of John and Terence in this too as well. I look forward to as well to us taking this on and for us to grow, as Terence's vision, a Northern Ireland that is actually world class, a Singapore of the present day world, because the people are here to be able to do it. We just need to take away this out of talking about it to doing it. So thank you very much again, John. Thank you very much again, Terence, and for everyone too as well for attending. I know within our staff we have got many entrepreneurs. I know within our staff we have got many enterprising people. I see it day and daily, and I have absolute confidence that we can actually deliver. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So the last thing then, we want to sort of summarise. The purpose of today was to bring the staff along to hear what Terence and what John have to say. What we want to do after this at a later stage is John and myself will have a chat with some of you about some of your ideas, because everybody will have different opinions or thoughts or how we can actually take this forward. You know, and even as I look around the audience, I know an awful lot of enterprise and entrepreneurial staff. And I'm going to single one out. Brian over there, at the start of the year, we were in a meeting in the boardroom there, and he and Paul came running after me and said, we want to buy a horse box. Started off as a horse box, it's now grown into something much bigger. But they wanted to buy a horse box to, that'd be in Down Royal, but they wanted to buy a horse box to convert it into a pop-up restaurant so that we could actually take the food that we have in the college out to events and other places. And that's something that is really very entrepreneurial in its ideas, and I know the guys have gone in for all sorts of competitions internationally, etc. But that's the type of thing that we want to try and do initially for our staff and our students, but eventually then what we want is more of our students getting the horse box and growing their own companies and taking it out and earning a living from it. And that's one example in one area. There are lots of different examples that will work in different areas. And I think, you know, back to the model that was used in the prison, it's inspiring those students, and you're the if you like, the conduit to those students and your colleagues as well, you know, from today. How do we get to those students? How do we identify them? How do we support them? And we can through the entrepreneur questionnaire. But then what do we do after that? And as Ken said, taking it from talking about it to actually doing something about it. And back to the aim that we said right at the very outset, when Terence met me, he said, what is it you want to do? I said, we want to grow more entrepreneurs. So we have lots of different sources in here. Our students, by default, will be more entrepreneurial. Because as John rightly says, they're non-conformist. So how do we support them, identify them, and point them in the right direction so that they can get the support, and then the funding, and generate their ideas, refine their ideas, and develop them even further. So what we want to try and do is do this in every campus. We're going to start off initially with Bangor. We're going to then develop it in all the campuses and get the staff who want to do this initially. But really we want to try and get the opportunities for all students in the college who potentially have an idea that they can come directly to the Entrepreneurs Club. And they will be given tasks. It won't just be about hearing talk or getting wisdom and advice. It'll be, well, what are the next things with regard to your idea? Have you thought about? Who are you actually going to be working with? You know, you may have that idea, but who's the person? Who's the process person or the enterprising person that you need to get the whole thing to work, and making the students aware that they need those other types of people as well. So we need to find a way to say this is true project-based learning. We don't know what the outcome is going to be, but we need to find the best solution we have within the constraints that we have in the college, and using the advice and guidance of our two guests that I'm delighted to have here today. So any other thoughts or comments just initially?
I'm totally inspired by everything that you guys have said, and in terms of the approach and the risk-taking and the innovation and the ability to see the opportunity, it's been, I think, very inspiring, certainly for me, and I'm probably speaking on behalf of everybody else. And I suppose it is that challenge of what do we do next? We also work with graduates in our graduate development programme, and one of the tasks that we do in the residential, when they all think they're going to hit the bar and have a great evening, is, by the way guys, you're actually going to present a new product idea at 11 o'clock in the morning to a panel of CEOs. And that is it. It is a blank canvas, and the ideas that have come out of that have been phenomenal. We're all sort of sitting back and going, how do they think of this with a gin and tonic in their hand, you know? But it is sort of almost a bit like, do we start with giving them the opportunity that they can create ideas? You know, because a lot of people don't know about the idea yet. You know, so that whole idea generation, that it's all very doable.
Can I just say something? I know you want to say something. I was thinking, one of the things that we're both convinced of, because there's a lot of different approaches to entrepreneurship that I don't agree with, but is that if you nurture the entrepreneurial mindset, they may or may not have the idea, but they'll make something of the idea. Are you with me? A lot of approaches I've seen in universities are, you research this area, you come up with an idea, we'll make you an entrepreneur. That's not where it's at, if you're with me. So what you're hitting on, I think, is really critical, that if people have that mindset and are put in the right environment, if that's what's nurtured, then the business will come out of it. So.
Yeah, I think there's two things there. One, the best example is the 4 guys in McGilligan. One of them didn't have an idea. He'd gone through the process, and so it was recognised he did have entrepreneurial mindset. And again, it was me saying to him, that's fine. It's fine not to have an idea at the moment. You need to give yourself time and space to think through what you're going to be comfortable doing. What's going to catch your eye, and what opportunity might you spot, and it'll come at the right time. What you have got is a mindset, and what we will do is support that mindset. And he sat in every meeting and heard about the other guys, and I'd set them homework, and they'd come back with the answers, and they did their work. And by the way, the guy who got out, one of the first things I said to him is, there's this cleaning, but it was a very specialist area, niche area, which I see tremendous opportunity for. And I said to him, right, that's a great area. Capture this as a website. I'm going to give you a domain name, capture it now. You get out of here and you do it. Within an hour, he sent me the note back, got it, because he moved. Now that's a guy who didn't have an idea, but he had the mindset, and it needed, you need to come to terms with it has to be something that you feel, right, that's what will create the drive. I don't care if they don't have the idea. I certainly don't care if they don't have the money. What I do care about is that they have the mindset, and most importantly, they have the drive. And it's what you discovered there was that thing of people getting excited about and not setting the boundaries. The point that Ken made of not telling them what needs to be on the piece of paper, what they should make out of the piece of paper. There's the piece of paper. Make of it what you will. And they will be committed to something that's theirs. Don't give entrepreneurs a business, give them an opportunity.
So any other thoughts or comments? Brian, have you any comments from a point of view, you know, because
to be honest, the whole BBL approach, I think suits you being maybe from a catering background to a certain extent. You understand caterers are more hands-on. Maybe find it very hard to visualise things, but put something in front of them, let them lay their hands on it. It makes a big difference, and that's where the whole pop-up trailer thing came from. Where we want to give people the opportunity to see that it is quite viable to set up a business with nothing. Because I might have a student up there who has the next McDonald's, or I don't know what's in their head.
Yep.
And that's the bit that I find, I don't know, what's the way I put it? I find it exhilarating for myself to know that I can maybe help them along their way. But the whole trailer thing is to give them the opportunity to see where it works. You know what I mean? To see where, and then give them the opportunity to, let's go for it.
You know, the great thing about that is see people in catering. If you just take that area itself, people in catering. I have people who have started their own contract catering business. I've had, and I mean made millions. I've have people who have become great chefs and very successful and written books who worked for me. And I've had some who have gone and become producers, i.e. they create the produce that they're selling into the industry. So they found a niche that they felt comfortable with. They found an area. And that thing of, one of the questions that I always ask myself when I'm going into something new, and I ask other people, is in how many ways can you? So like the horse box thing, it's in how many ways could we use that? It's not just events. In how many ways and in how many situations could we use that? That's what I always do. And you then find perhaps that bloody hell, there are more events and opportunities than we have horse boxes. Well, I think we better get another horse box. You know, so you end up with, now, you end up with a series of horse boxes. But that's great. That's what it's about. It is, so there can be lots of different areas that businesses can be driven out of.
I think the thing with us and what we wanted to do right from the very start with that idea is to make it adaptable, that we can't be bespoke, that we can be bespoke to the students' needs, that the equipment can change at any time, the branding can change at any time. Because I think in catering, it's all right having a great chef, but it's really that agent over there reins me in with my ideas, and that's what we said before about having people beside you that are able to. Well, he reins me in and keeps me in line, because I would just go OTT. But I think also having a wee bit of cheek also helps. I'm a great believer in just asking for something for nothing. Because if you don't ask, you don't get. That's what my mum always told me. So.
Yeah, but see, that cheek comes from the drive. It's the drive to want to do it, and you'll do the things that perhaps you would have felt a discomfort with before, but you've driven by the passion of the idea. That's what it does to you, and that's the wonderful thing. You know, I had a school, I had a classmate who is incredibly well known today, and he was seen as a failure at school. In fact, there were other boys trying to bully him, and the only thing I was really good at in school was sport, and I used to get involved. But this guy, a chap called Loudon, his passion was guitars. He was good on guitar, and he said, I want to make guitars. And people were laughing at him. We went to Sullivan together, and people were laughing at this lad. Loudon Guitars is the best in the world. Made here in Northern Ireland. He started it, and people were laughing at him. And he started, it's his. It's his name, it's his guitars. You know, the best in the world, and people come to him, all the great musicians in the world come to him to get guitars built. And it's that thing of, and he just had the focus and determination, and he didn't care what other people thought of his idea. He was determined to deliver it, and he was prepared to do whatever it took to get it done, legal. But he was prepared to do whatever it took. And whether it was going and begging for wood or money, or he was determined to do whatever it took. And I've seen so many people like that, and you'll find that, just taking the example of your trailer, you might find some of them involved go, do you know what, there's a great market for these trailers. I'm going to start making trailers. You would not believe the things that people spin out of one great idea, and then they find, actually, what if I did this, or did this, or did this? It's the spark that creates that, and to see that in people, and I don't care what age they are, to see that spark suddenly start a flame in people is fantastic. And to be a part of that, and to help that process, is one of the most satisfying things I've ever done in my life.
You'll have to say, with just taking the trailer for example, it's great, you know, going to other departments and saying, this is what we want, and then them come back saying what they can do. And I went with a scrap of paper, and I don't know how anybody made a note of it, like, but they got it done, and they're doing it. But it's the students, everybody's getting a wee bit of a cherry, which I find good. And I would love to move on to something else after trailers, but we'll talk about that later. But as you say, I would love to make this one a success, generate enough to get another one, send it to our campus, generate and roll it out, because there is so many opportunities. You know, and just keep it going. But if it gives one student the inspiration to go, well, I can do this.
Yeah.
And it has. You know, I mean, there are students out who have used our street food thing over the last couple of years, and it has inspired them to go on and say, I can do this. And that's what makes it for me.
The biggest thing of all, and you know this from dealing with students, the biggest thing of all is never, ever, ever tell anybody it's a stupid idea. Because even if you think it's a stupid idea, what you do is you switch them off from having great ideas. just that thing of being open-minded, and when somebody comes with the idea, I don't make a judgment as to whether I think it would make a good business or not. I go, okay, if you want to make that into a business, here, the homework thing, here's what you need to do next. Go off and do that. And actually, quite often, if I've thought, I'm not sure about that idea, they go off, they do the work. What I love is their enthusiasm, but they come back, and by that time, I've kind of gone, do you know what? This actually might work. This actually might be a good. And then I start catching on. And so I try never, ever, ever to judge the idea. And sometimes they come up with an idea and they come to their own conclusion that, do you know what? I'm not sure that one's going to work, but I've got another one. Tell me about that one. And it doesn't have to be young people. As I said to you, entrepreneurs come in every shape, size, age, profile, thankfully.
So, audience, do we want to show our appreciation for the talk?
Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you.
And as I say, what we will be doing, even for those who weren't able to make it here today, is we want to try and get people on all campuses, all different campuses, to come along to start to talk about what works for catering, what works for performing arts or for art or for construction or whatever. And let's see how we can actually take this forward. You know, we don't have a nice silver bullet solution. There'll be lots and lots of different solutions. But by working through it, we'll learn as we go along. So thank you very much indeed.